The desert trail into San Judas was nothing but dust, heat, and the endless groan of leather. Jonah Calloway sat high in the saddle, his hat pulled low against the sun that beat down like a hammer. His horse's shadow stretched long over the cracked earth, moving slow, patient, the way desert things learn to move. In the distance, the town came into view, a scatter of sun-baked adobe and timber buildings huddled along a narrow main street, as if they were bracing themselves against the wind. Jonah slowed his horse as he entered, taking in the way the townsfolk moved. Or rather, didn't. Men in wide hats leaned in doorways, eyes following him but not a single greeting leaving their lips. Women glanced up from their laundry, then looked away just as quick. The only sound was the rhythmic clang of a hammer from the blacksmith's shop and the dry whisper of wind curling down the street. At the center of town rose the church, pale adobe walls, a simple wooden cross reaching for the white sky. It should have been a comforting sight, but there was something in the way it stood. Quiet, watchful, like it knew something Jonah didn't. He reined up near the watering trough, letting his horse drink while he looked at the building. Even in the harsh light, the shadows under the eaves seemed too deep. He was here for Caleb. His younger brother had gone missing somewhere along the border, and the last letter Jonah received had been postmarked from San Judas. That was 3 months ago. No more letters since, no word from anyone who'd seen him. Jonah stepped down from the saddle, boots hitting the packed dirt with a low thud. A boy, no more than 12, sat on the steps of the general store, tossing a stone in the air. Jonah tipped his hat. "You seen a man come through here by the name of Caleb Calloway?" Jonah asked. The boy caught the stone and looked away. "Don't know him." His voice was flat, like it had been practiced. Then he added, "You should leave before dark." Jonah's eyes narrowed, but the boy didn't offer anything more. He just went back to tossing the stone, slow and steady, like counting time. Jonah turned toward the church again, feeling a prickle crawl up the back of his neck. He'd been in enough bad towns to know when people were hiding something. And in San Judas, the shadow of the cross seemed to stretch longer than it should. Before we jump back in, make sure you subscribe, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special just for you. Another story, another secret, and maybe a whisper you weren't meant to hear. The heavy wooden doors of the San Judas church groaned as Jonah pushed them open. Inside, the air was cooler, thick with the scent of candle wax and old incense. Sunlight filtered through narrow windows, laying thin golden stripes across the worn pews. For a moment, Jonah just stood there, letting his eyes adjust. A man in black stepped out from behind the altar, his boots soundless on the flagstone floor. His cassock was crisp, his collar clean, and a silver crucifix gleamed against his chest. The man's face was pale beneath his wide-brim hat, his hair gone silver at the temples. "Welcome, traveler," the man said, his voice low and smooth. "I am Father Marino. You've come a long way, I think." Jonah removed his hat, holding it at his side, looking for someone. "My brother." The priest tilted his head, the smile on his face warm enough, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Many pass through San Judas, few stay, fewer still." Er remembered. Something about the way he said it made Jonah's grip on his hat tighten. "Last I heard from him was here. Caleb Calloway, tall, brown hair, a scar over his left eye." Father Marino's gaze didn't waver. "I'm sorry. No one by that name has been here." A faint creak drew Jonah's attention to the side aisle, where 2 men in plain clothes stood half in shadow. Their eyes were fixed on him, unblinking. The priest spread his hands. "But I'll keep my ears open. In the meantime, perhaps you'd join us for Sunday service. We keep an open door for the faithful." Jonah studied him for a long moment. That smile stayed put, frozen in place like it had been carved there. Finally, Jonah nodded once and set his hat back on his head. "I might, he said, turning toward the door. The sun outside was blinding after the dim interior, but Jonah could still feel Father Marino's gaze on his back until the heavy doors swung shut. Jonah's room above the cantina smelled faintly of stale liquor and wood smoke. The walls were thin enough that the piano downstairs drifted up in jagged notes, sometimes drowned out by the rowdy laughter of drinkers. He sat at the small desk by the window, cleaning his revolver by lamplight. When the music stopped and the voices changed, 2 men had stepped outside into the alley below. Their words were low, quick, and carried a sharp edge. Deliveries coming in tomorrow night. And Father says the altar's off limits till it's done. Jonah leaned forward, careful to keep in the shadow of the curtain. The men's hats shielded their faces, but their movements were deliberate, practiced, the kind of men who watched their surroundings even while talking. "What about the stranger?" one asked. A pause, then let him sniff around. "He'll leave before long, or he won't." The second man gave a short laugh that didn't sound amused. "And if he doesn't? Then he goes under the cross like the rest." They moved on, their boots crunching in the dirt, leaving Jonah staring into the dark alley long after they'd gone. Under the cross. The phrase rolled through his mind like a warning. He thought about the way Father Marino's smile had held steady, about the silent men in the church, about the boy's quiet advice to leave before dark. Jonah blew out the lamp and sat in the darkness, listening to the quiet street outside. Somewhere in this town, someone knew where Caleb was. And Jonah was starting to think the answer was buried deep in that church, maybe literally. The church was different at night. Jonah slipped through the side door just before midnight, the cool air inside pressing against the lingering heat of the desert. Candles still burned in small clusters near the altar, their flames bending in the faint draft that whispered through the nave. The place was silent, too silent, as if the whole building was holding its breath. He moved slow, his boots barely making a sound on the stone floor. Every creak of the wood pews felt louder than it should have. He kept one hand close to the butt of his revolver as he stepped up to the altar. The stone slab at the base caught his attention. It was slightly scuffed, not with age, but with recent wear, faint marks like something had been dragged across. Jonah crouched and ran his fingers along the edge. That's when he found it, a small recessed metal lever, half hidden behind the carved molding. A slow pull brought a deep, muffled click. The altar shifted with a low grind and a square section of floor behind it began to lift. A trapdoor, thick reinforced wood framed with iron bands. From below rose the faintest hum of voices, laughter, and the clink of metal. Jonah leaned over, peering into the darkness beneath. The air coming up was warm and smelled of sweat, dust, and something else, something metallic. He caught a glint down there, the flicker of lamplight on gold. His pulse quickened. A sudden shuffle of boots echoed behind him, and Jonah froze. From the back of the church, a shadow detached from the wall and began to move toward him. Jonah dropped into the darkness, landing in a crouch on packed earth. The lamplight was dimmed down here, flickering against walls cut from the desert rock. The sound of laughter and clinking metal was louder now, echoing through the narrow tunnel that stretched ahead. He kept low, following the glow until the passage opened into a wide chamber. The smell hit him first, stale sweat, tobacco, and gun oil. Half a dozen men lounged at crude wooden tables, counting gold coins and sorting through crates marked with brands from ranches hundreds of miles away. Rifles leaned against the walls, revolvers rested on the tables within easy reach. A stack of burlap sacks sagged with the weight of whatever was inside, likely more stolen goods. Jonah's eyes scanned every corner, memorizing the layout. Then he saw it, hanging from a nail on the far wall, a worn brown hat with a small tear on the brim, Caleb's hat. His chest tightened, but he forced himself to stay calm. He was in deep now, and one wrong move would have him joining whatever poor souls had crossed these men before. A voice boomed from the far side of the room. "Keep countin', boys. Father wants the shipment ready before Sunday." Jonah's mind raced. The priest wasn't just blessing this operation, he was running it. He was about to edge back toward the tunnel when a shadow shifted to his left. "Hey!" Jonah turned just in time to see a bandit's eyes narrow in suspicion. The bandit's hand hovered over the grip of his revolver. Jonah didn't wait for him to draw. He lunged forward, grabbing the man by the collar and slamming him into the tunnel wall. The impact rattled a lantern hanging nearby, sending shadows jumping across the cavern. "Who the hell?" the bandit started, but Jonah drove a fist into his gut, cutting the words short. The man doubled over, gasping, and Jonah shoved him deeper into the darkness of the side passage. Shouts erupted behind them. "Who's there?" Boots scraped against the dirt as chairs scraped back. Jonah yanked the man's revolver from its holster and cracked him across the temple with it. The body slumped to the ground. Now the shouts were closer. A shot rang out, the muzzle flash lighting the chamber in a violent burst. Jonah ducked behind a stack of crates, splinters flying as a bullet punched through the wood. He returned fire, the sound deafening in the confined space. Another bullet whistled past his ear, close enough to sting. He bolted toward the tunnel he'd come through, firing twice more to keep the bandits' heads down. Dirt and rock showered from the ceiling as gunfire followed him. He reached the base of the ladder just as a bullet slammed into the rung above. His head, climbing fast, he pushed up on the trapdoor with his shoulder, the heavy wood groaning. The church above was empty. He hauled himself up, slammed the trapdoor shut, and threw the lever back into place. His chest heaved as he pressed his ear to the altar. The voices below were angry now, and moving. Jonah knew he couldn't come back here again. Not without a plan. The undertaker's shop sat at the far edge of town, where the main street gave way to the open desert. Jonah found it by following the smell of varnish and the faint sound of a saw moving through pine. Inside, the air was cool and dim, heavy with the scent of wood shavings and candle wax. A thin man in a black waistcoat stood over an unfinished coffin, his hands moving slow and careful along the sanded edge. He didn't look up when Jonah stepped in. "You looking to order ahead?" the man asked, his voice dry as the desert wind. "Not for me," Jonah said, stepping closer. "I've got questions." That earned him a glance, pale eyes, sharp, but not unfriendly. "Questions get folks in trouble here." Jonah rested his hand on the counter. "I heard a phrase last night. Under the cross. Figured you might know what it means." The undertaker set down his sandpaper and leaned on the coffin, studying Jonah for a long moment. "Under the cross is where the town puts things it doesn't want found." "You mean the tunnels under the church?" The man's gaze flicked toward the window, then back. "I didn't say that. But I'll say this. The people who go looking for what's down there, I end up building them a box. And the graves out back don't have names." Jonah didn't miss the way the undertaker's eyes softened just a touch, like he was weighing something. "You're not from here," the man continued. "That means you've still got a chance to walk away." Jonah tipped his hat. "Appreciate the advice." He stepped outside into the bright afternoon, the smell of pine still clinging to him. Walking away wasn't an option. Not while Caleb was still out there. Sunday morning came with the low toll of the church bell, each strike rolling through the dusty streets like a slow heartbeat. Jonah stood at the back of the crowd filing into the adobe church, his hat pulled low, his eyes scanning every face. Inside, the pews were nearly full. Men sat with their hats in their laps, women bowed their heads, children fidgeted in their Sunday best. But Jonah noticed something off. Several of the men weren't dressed for worship. Their coats were too heavy for the heat, their eyes too sharp. Beneath the hymnals and folded hands, He could almost see the shapes of revolvers resting in hidden holsters. Father Marino stepped up to the pulpit, his cassock crisp and unwrinkled, his voice rising smooth and steady as he began the sermon. On the surface, his words were about sin and redemption, about the price of forgiveness. But woven into his scripture were veiled threats, the kind meant for ears that knew how to hear them. "And those who betray the flock," Marino said, pausing to look across the room, "shall be cast into darkness, their names erased from the book of life. The Lord will know them no more." Jonah felt the weight of the gaze settle on him, even from halfway back. Around the room, the armed men sat motionless, listening like every word was law. When the collection plate was passed, Jonah saw more than coins and crumpled bills drop in, small folded slips of paper, each one quickly covered by the next donation. The hymn that followed was sung soft, almost mechanical, the voices carrying no joy. By the time the final blessing was spoken, Jonah knew two things for certain. The church was more than a house of God. And Father Marino's flock wasn't just praying on Sundays. That night, the cantina was alive with noise, boots stomping to the fiddle's quick tempo, dice clattering on tables, mugs slamming against wood. Jonah sat in a shadowed corner, nursing a whiskey, his eyes on the man 3 tables over. The bandit was easy to spot, rough beard, sunburnt skin, and a coat too heavy for the heat. Jonah had seen him in the church that morning, sitting near the front, his head bowed in piety while his eyes tracked every movement in the room. Hours and drinks later, the man stumbled into the alley, fumbling with his coat buttons. Jonah followed, stepping out into the cool night air just as the bandit stopped to steady himself against the wall. "Evenin'," Jonah said, keeping his tone casual. The man squinted at him. "You the stranger?" "Depends who's asking." Jonah stepped closer, the click of his revolver's hammer loud in the narrow space. "I got questions, and you're gonna answer 'em." The bandit's smirk faltered. "You don't know what you're messin' with." "Maybe not," Jonah said, "but I know you've seen my brother." The man's eyes flicked toward the church tower silhouetted against the moon. "If he's still breathin', he's below." "Below what?" The bandit swallowed hard. "Below the cross. Tunnels run all through the rock. We move gold, guns, anything that'll fetch a price. Father's the one keeping the books." "And Caleb?" The man hesitated. Jonah stepped forward, pressing the cold barrel under his chin. "Last I saw him," the bandit said quickly, "he wasn't wearing shackles yet. But once Father gets what he wants, there's only one way out." Jonah let the man go, shoving him back toward the street. The drunk stumbled away, muttering something about coffins and shallow graves. Jonah holstered his gun, the weight in his chest heavier than before. If Caleb was still alive, time was running short. The wind had died by the time Jonah reached the outskirts of town, leaving the desert still and heavy. He found the old cattle shed exactly where the drunken bandit had described, half collapsed, hidden in the shadow of a low ridge. Inside, the smell of dust and old hay clung to the air, and a single lantern burned low on a rickety table. Seated there was a man Jonah recognized instantly, though time and hardship had sharpened his face. Caleb Calloway looked older, harder, his once clean shirt torn and streaked with dirt. He didn't stand when Jonah stepped inside, just leaned back, arms folded, eyes guarded. "You shouldn't be here," Caleb said quietly. "I've been looking for you for months," Jonah replied. "You're coming with me." Caleb shook his head. "You don't understand. I can't leave, not without signing my own death warrant." "And yours," Jonah stepped closer. "What have they got on you?" "Same thing they got on everyone who works for him, the blood oath." Caleb's voice was flat, but his jaw was tight. "Once you're in, there's no walking away. Father Marino sees to that. You swear loyalty to the gang in front of the cross, cut your palm, and shake his hand. After that, You belong to him until you're buried under the floor. Jonah felt his stomach knot. You didn't take it, did you? Caleb hesitated, and that silence was answer enough. They caught me after I stole a horse. Said they'd kill me unless I worked for him. I thought maybe I could play along, find a way out. But they don't let go, Jonah. Ever. Jonah's fists clenched at his sides. Then I'll make him let go. Caleb's eyes were hard, but there was a flicker of hope. The same hope Jonah had seen in him when they were boys. You'd better move fast. Once Sunday comes, they'll make sure I disappear for good. Jonah waited until after midnight to make his move. The church sat dark and still against the pale glow of the moon, the cross casting a long shadow across the empty street. He slipped inside through the same side door as before, keeping to the deepest stretches of darkness until he reached the altar. This time he didn't hesitate. The hidden lever gave way with a soft click, and the trapdoor lifted with a slow, groaning sigh. Jonah descended the ladder, the lamplight from below spilling weakly over his boots. The tunnels were quieter than his first visit. He moved carefully, hugging the walls, until he found a narrow side passage he hadn't noticed before. The smell hit him first, damp earth, decay, something metallic and sharp in the air. At the end of the passage, the ground opened into a cramped chamber with a low ceiling. Wooden planks made up the floor, uneven and stained. Jonah crouched, running his fingers over the gaps, and that's when he saw it. Beneath one loose board was a hand. Pale, lifeless, the skin tight over the bones. Jonah forced the board up and found more. Arms, shoulders, faces half covered by dirt. Dozens of them, stacked in shallow graves beneath the church. The air was heavy with the silence of those who would never speak again. He gritted his teeth and put the board back in place. Caleb's time was running out, and if Jonah didn't move fast, his brother's body would be added to the ones beneath. His boots. A noise echoed from deeper in the tunnel, the sound of footsteps and murmured voices drawing closer. Jonah slipped back into the shadows, his hand resting on the grip of his revolver. Whatever came next, there would be no turning. Back. The footsteps grew louder, echoing off the tunnel walls. Jonah flattened himself against the cold stone, watching as two armed men emerged from the gloom. They carried lanterns that threw wild shadows across their faces, their voices low but tense. Jonah didn't give them the chance to react. His revolver barked once, the first man dropping instantly, lantern clattering to the dirt. The second spun toward him, gun halfway out of its holster, but Jonah's second shot found his chest. The tunnel filled with the acrid stench of gunpowder. He moved fast, snatching up one of the lanterns and heading for the main chamber. The hideout was half full, crates stacked high, gold spilling from open sacks, and at least a dozen armed men scrambling for cover as Jonah burst in. Get him! Someone shouted. Gunfire erupted, deafening in the confined space. Jonah dove behind a stack of crates, splinters spraying into his face as bullets tore through the wood. He fired back, dropping two men before rolling to the next bit of cover. A round slammed into a lantern on the wall, shattering glass and setting a spill of oil ablaze. Flames licked up the tunnel wall, smoke curling toward the low ceiling. Through the chaos, Jonah spotted Father Marino himself, calm amid the storm, standing at the far end of the chamber beneath a massive wooden cross bolted into the stone. He wasn't holding a gun. He didn't have to. His men fought like devils. For him, Jonah took aim, but one of Marino's lieutenants charged, swinging the butt of a rifle. The blow glanced off Jonah's shoulder, sending pain shooting down his arm. He answered with a quick shot to the man's leg, then finished him with a punch that sent him sprawling. Bullets cracked against the stone around him, and Jonah knew he couldn't stay pinned forever. Marino had Caleb somewhere in this warren. And if Jonah didn't reach him soon, the flames, or the bandits, would finish the job first. Jonah pushed deeper into the tunnels, using the chaos of the gunfight to slip past Marino's men. The heat from the growing fire was chasing the air out of the warren, making every breath feel like swallowing smoke. Somewhere ahead, over the crackle of flames and the shouts of bandits, Jonah heard the muffled sound of someone pounding against wood. He followed it into a narrow side passage where a heavy storage door was bolted shut. The pounding came again, followed by a hoarse voice. Caleb's voice. "Jonah, get me out of here." Jonah dropped the lantern and went to work on the bolt, grunting as the hot metal burned his fingers. He wrenched it free and kicked the door open. Caleb stumbled out, eyes watering from the smoke, wrists raw from rope burns. "You're late," Caleb rasped, but his smile was fierce with relief. "Couldn't find the right tie to wear," Jonah said, forcing a smirk as he shoved a revolver into his brother's hand. "We've got company." They moved together back toward the main chamber, keeping low as gunfire still echoed from the far side. The fire had spread along one wall, licking at crates of stolen goods and sending up thick, black smoke. One bandit rounded the corner ahead. Caleb fired first, the man crumpling without a sound. "This way," Jonah said, pointing toward a smaller tunnel that led toward the ladder beneath the altar. But as they neared it, a tall figure stepped into view, blocking their escape. Father Marino. The firelight glinted off the silver crucifix at his chest, and his calm expression never wavered. "You could have left this town alive, Mr. Calloway," he said softly. "But you had to come digging." Jonah's finger tightened on the trigger. "And you should have left my brother alone." The fire's glow painted Father Marino in flickering orange, shadows curling across his face like the fingers of something reaching from below. He didn't draw a weapon. He simply stood there, the crucifix catching the light, his eyes steady. "On Jonah, you think killing me will end this?" Marino said, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. "Men like me don't die in gunfights. We live in the fear we leave behind." Jonah didn't answer. Caleb shifted beside him, raising his revolver, but Marino's gaze slid to the younger Calloway and froze him in place. "You swore the oath, boy," Marino said, his tone almost gentle. "You belong to the cross. There's only one way to be free, and it ain't leaving here alive." Jonah moved first. His shot echoed like thunder in the low tunnel, but Marino was fast, impossibly fast for a man his age. The bullet tore through the edge of his cassock as he lunged for cover behind a crate. Gunfire erupted in both directions, each shot sending sparks off the stone walls. Caleb flanked left, forcing Marino to pivot, and Jonah used the moment to close the distance. Marino's revolver came up, but Jonah slammed into him, the two crashing into the burning crate. Gold coins spilled across the floor, sizzling where they landed in the flames. The smell of burning wood and gunpowder mixed into a choking haze. They struggled, Marino's strength shocking for his lean frame. His hands went for Jonah's throat, the crucifix swinging like a pendulum between them. Jonah drove his fist into Marino's ribs once, twice, until the older man gasped and loosened his grip. Caleb's shot rang out, striking Marino square in the chest. The priest staggered back, eyes wide in disbelief, then collapsed against the base of the great wooden cross. As the fire climbed higher, Jonah grabbed Caleb's arm. "We're done here." They ran for the ladder, leaving Father Marino beneath the cross, the smoke swallowing him whole. The church burned behind them, flames clawing at the night sky, the bell tower glowing red against the stars. Jonah and Caleb burst out into this cool desert air, coughing hard as they staggered toward the hitching posts. The horses stamped nervously, eyes wide at the scent of smoke and gunpowder. Jonah swung into the saddle first, pulling his bandana up over his face. Caleb climbed onto the second horse with a wince, still sore from his captivity. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say that the fire hadn't already said for them. As they rode out, the town of San Judas lay silent, its streets Empty, its windows dark. A few shadowy figures watched from doorways, but no one stepped forward, no one called out. The gang was leaderless now, but Jonah knew men like that didn't simply vanish. They'd scatter, hide, and maybe one day regroup. The desert swallowed them as the first light of dawn began to touch the horizon. Behind them, the cross of the church stood black against the flames until, at last, it toppled with a groan, sending up a shower of sparks that faded into the dark. Jonah glanced at Caleb, who was staring ahead, jaw set. "You're free now," Jonah said quietly. Caleb shook his head. "Not until they're all gone." Jonah nodded once. "Then we keep riding." And without another word, the two brothers disappeared into the open expanse, the desert wind carrying them toward whatever fight waited next. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story travels.